Welcome to Vale Marks, where every story about dogs carries emotion, healing, and hope. Today, I'll share with you the story of Clara and Sage, a young girl who had lost her voice and a retired service dog who had lost his mission. Together, they found a new purpose in each other. This is not just a tale about rescue. It's a journey of silent courage, unspoken love, and second chances. Before we begin, drop your country in the comments so we can see just how far this story of quiet heroes will travel. Now, let's begin. The final livestock auction of the season had always drawn a crowd to Spring Hollow, a sleepy farming town nestled between hills that blazed gold every October. Families came for the kettle corn and barrel races, for the promise of bargains and last-chance sales before winter locked everything quiet. But beyond the hum of voices, the rustle of feed sacks, and the laughter of children chasing after goats on rope leashes, there was another corner of the fairgrounds, one no one lingered in long. A place where crates and cages lined the fence like forgotten luggage, each holding an animal nobody had chosen. They called it the Silent Aisle. No signs, no music, no prizes. Just the soft clink of metal, the occasional cough of something old, sick, or scared, and the low drone of an auctioneer's voice fading into the wind. Clara Miles stood at the edge of that aisle, clutching a glass jar against her chest. The sunlight caught the fingerprints on it, smudging the shimmer of the coins and crumpled dollar bills inside. She had counted it 3 times that morning, $61.25, every penny she'd earned from lemonade stands, washing her neighbors' windows, and collecting soda cans all summer. She hadn't told anyone why she was saving, not even her mom. But Grandpa Eli, who had brought her to the auction, seemed to understand. He always did, in his own quiet way. Clara was 10 years old, small for her age, with long legs and tangled chestnut hair that refused to stay in a braid. She wore a yellow cotton dress that used to be her Sunday best, now a bit too short and wrinkled from the drawer. She didn't speak much anymore, not since the accident. People assumed she was just shy. Some said she was slow. Others whispered about trauma, that word adults use when they're afraid to say broken. But Clara wasn't broken. She was just waiting for something to make the world feel safe again. The auctioneer's voice crackled over the speaker. Next up, crate number 47, male German Shepherd, approximately 6 years old. Returned twice, medical concerns, no guarantees. A lanky volunteer in a mud-stained vest pulled the crate forward, wheels squeaking. The crowd shifted, murmured, then fell silent. Inside was a dog, unlike the others who had come before, those tail-wagging retrievers and eager young pups. This one didn't move. He was big, but gaunt, his ribs visible under a mottled coat that had once been thick and proud. One ear stood upright while the other hung limp, like a flag in retreat. His eyes, a dull amber, stared past the people, past the auctioneer, past the world itself. Someone near the back of the group chuckled softly. That one looks half dead. Another voice, not unkind but dismissive, added, "Might as well dig the hole now." Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Even the auctioneer hesitated. But Clara didn't move. She stood, frozen, staring into those empty eyes. He reminded her of someone. Of something. Her father, maybe, just before the machine stopped beeping in the hospital room. Of herself, on the porch swing in the weeks after, staring at the sky without blinking. She didn't know why, but something inside her, deep in her chest, leaned toward the dog like a compass finding north. She looked up at her grandfather. Eli stood with his arms crossed, his sheriff's cap tucked under one elbow, eyes narrowed beneath deep-set wrinkles. A man of few words, more action than sentiment, but Clara knew him. She saw the twitch in his brow, the same look he had when they buried her dad. Clara tugged his sleeve gently, stepped forward and whispered, "They see a broken dog. I see someone who once protected a broken world." Eli didn't answer. He just exhaled, slow and low, then nodded once. The auctioneer cleared his throat, half-hearted. "Do I hear 30? 25? 10? No one raised a hand. The silence felt heavier than before, the kind that makes you shift your feet and glance at your watch. Clara stepped into the space between the crates and the crowd. Her shoes crunched on gravel as she walked forward, the jar of money clinking against her chest. She held it out, arms trembling slightly. "I'll take him," she said. The words were quiet, but they landed like a thunderclap. Heads turned. Someone near the back muttered, "Is she serious?" Eli stepped forward, his voice calm. "That's my granddaughter. If she says he's hers, then he is." The auctioneer blinked, startled. "Well, all right then. $61.25, Clara added. The man nodded, then banged his gavel. "Sold to the girl in the yellow dress." A wave of murmurs followed. Not unkind now, just confused. Some clapped half-heartedly, others shook their heads. The volunteer unlatched the crate and stepped back. Clara crouched beside the opening. The dog didn't move. "It's okay," she whispered, voice barely audible. "You're safe now." The dog blinked once. Then slowly, creaking like old floorboards, he stood. His legs wobbled, but he walked forward, past the volunteer, past the auctioneer, straight to Clara. He didn't sniff her, didn't wag his tail. He simply stopped and rested his chin lightly against her shoulder. The crowd went silent. Eli, standing behind them, said softly, "Well, I'll be damned." Clara smiled for the first time in weeks. She didn't know his name, didn't know what he'd seen or what he'd lost, but she knew this: he had been waiting just like her. And today, they had found each other. For as long as anyone in Spring Hollow could remember, Clara Miles had been the little girl with the voice like honey in morning sunlight. She used to sing to the cows behind her house, to the stars when she thought no one was listening, and especially to her daddy, who swore her voice was the only thing sweeter than cornbread fresh from the oven. That voice vanished the day he died. It had been nearly 2 years since the construction accident. Clara had been standing at the edge of the site, waiting with a lunchbox in her arms, waving to her dad when the scaffolding collapsed. The sound of metal screeching, the dust, the yelling, none of it ever fully left her. After that, words turned into stones she couldn't lift. Her voice folded itself into silence and stayed there. Now, Clara spoke only in gestures, glances, and the quiet echo of who she used to be. She lived in a small farmhouse on the southern edge of town with her mother, June, and her grandfather, Eli. June was a nurse, always rushing between shifts, her scrubs smelling faintly of antiseptic and lavender. She was kind, gentle, and bone-tired from working double shifts ever since her husband's death. The worry lines around her eyes had deepened, but her touch remained soft, especially when brushing the hair from Clara's brow each morning before school. Eli, her grandfather, was the opposite of gentle. A retired sheriff with a voice like gravel and the patience of a rusted gate. He rarely smiled and never hugged. But beneath his gruffness lay a heart stitched together with loyalty and grief. He made Clara pancakes every Saturday, even if she only picked at them. He fixed her bike, even though she hadn't ridden it since the funeral. And when she showed him the jar of coins and said nothing, he drove her to the auction without asking why. Eli understood silence more than most. Maybe that's why he'd taken to the dog so quickly. Sage, the name Clara gave the German shepherd that now slept in the barn, was more shadow than animal those first few days. He didn't bark, didn't wag his tail. He barely moved. He refused food, water, and any attempts at comfort. He would lie curled in the corner of the hayloft, head low, eyes dull, like the world had simply let go of him. "Dog's been through something," Eli muttered on the first evening, watching Sage from the doorway. Same way you can tell when a man's seen too much war. His eyes ain't looking at what's in front of him. They're looking back at ghosts. Clara sat cross-legged just outside the stall, her yellow dress tucked under her knees, a flashlight resting beside her. She had brought a book, an old soft-cover astronomy guide she used to read with her dad on the porch. The edges were worn, the pages peppered with tiny doodles of stars and hearts from years past. She opened it slowly and began to read. Not out loud, but in a whisper, the kind of voice that trembled like moth wings. She traced her finger along the constellations, mouthing the names as if she were casting spells. Orion, Cassiopeia, Canis Major. Sage didn't move. She read about Polaris, the North Star, about how, no matter how lost sailors were, it would always point them home. Her father used to call her his little Polaris. She turned a page and said, barely above breath, "If you're waiting for someone, I'm here." The words floated into the air like dandelion seeds, soft and aimless. Then for the first time, Sage blinked. Not a twitch or a flinch, just a long, slow opening of the eyes, like someone waking from a dream they weren't ready to leave. Clara's breath caught in her throat. He looked at her, not past her, not through her, but at her. His amber eyes, though cloudy with exhaustion, held something ancient and tired and full of unspoken things. He didn't growl, didn't move toward her. But he saw her, and she saw him. From the kitchen window, June watched her daughter and the dog through the glass, her hand paused above a mug of tea that had long gone cold. She saw how Clara reached forward, fingers trembling, and gently touched the curve of Sage's paw. The dog didn't pull away. "He let her touch him," June whispered. Eli, sitting at the table, raised an eyebrow. "Yeah," he said, sipping his black coffee. And she let him see her. That night, Clara didn't want to sleep in her room. She pulled an old quilt from the linen closet, blue with yellow stars, and lay it down in the barn, just outside Sage's stall. She curled up under it with her flashlight and her book, reading until her eyes grew heavy. Sage lay where he had been all evening, still watching. When Clara finally drifted off, the flashlight rolled from her hand and came to a rest near his paw. He sniffed it once, then, slowly, he crept a little closer. Not enough to touch her, but enough to share the space between them. The next morning, when Eli came to check on them before sunrise, he found Clara still asleep, her hand resting open near the straw. Sage was no longer in the corner. He lay facing her, his body curved like a question mark, his tail twitching lightly in the dust. Eli knelt quietly beside them and whispered to no one in particular, "Well, looks like she found her voice after all. Just ain't using words this time." It was the beginning of something neither of them could explain, but both of them needed. Two souls, each carrying scars no one could see, finding solace in a barn full of silence, under a sky full of stars. The first week passed in silence, but not the kind that's empty. This was a silence that pulsed, breathed, listened. It was the kind of quiet that stretched between two souls who had both forgotten how to speak and were slowly learning how to hear again. Sage still didn't bark. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't play, but he no longer hid in the shadowed corner of the stall. Each night, when Clara laid her quilt across the barn floor and opened her book of stars, he would shift just slightly closer. Not enough to touch, just enough to say, "I see you." Clara didn't talk to her mother. She didn't talk at school, but she had started talking to Sage. It began as whispers, memories slipping out between pages. She told him about her dad's old blue truck, the way it rattled on gravel roads but always smelled like peppermint gum and engine grease. She told him about the time they got lost in the woods behind their house, and her dad made up constellations with names like the Marshmallow Wolf and the Nap Dragon. "You'd like him," she said one night, her voice so soft it felt like it came from the rafters instead of her mouth. "He used to call me his compass, said I always pointed us home." Sage didn't blink. He just breathed, slow and steady. Every now and then, she'd test a word, like tossing a pebble into a still lake. "Stay," she whispered once, just to see what would happen. Sage's ear twitched. "Guard," she tried the next night. His head lifted slightly, his body stiffened for half a breath. Then he settled again. "Home," she said quietly. He let out a slow exhale through his nose, like the word had touched something buried deep beneath his ribs. Clara began to repeat these words gently, like they were lullabies instead of commands. It was the first time since her father's death that she'd found words she wanted to say. Inside the house, June noticed the change, but didn't say anything at first. She watched her daughter from the kitchen window standing barefoot in the barn doorway, whispering to a dog who never barked back. June was a woman of science and skill. She knew how to stitch up a wound and recognize a silent panic attack. She'd cared for strangers who called her Angel and watched more lives slip away than she liked to admit. But nothing in her training prepared her for the slow unraveling of her own child. So she waited, quietly hopeful, carefully afraid. One evening, after her shift at the hospital, she came home early and found Clara asleep in the barn, her head resting on an open book. Sage was lying nearby, his nose tucked under his paw, facing her like a sentinel. June didn't disturb them. She just stood there, tears rising uninvited, and whispered, "Thank you," to the dog. Grandpa Eli, on the other hand, had a different reaction. He'd been watching too, behind the rim of his coffee mug, behind the newspaper he pretended to read on the porch. He noticed the way Sage seemed to respond, not like a regular dog, but like a soldier waiting on command. "That ain't just a farm dog," he muttered one morning, rubbing his chin. "He's got training in his bones." He'd seen dogs like that before, when he was on the force. Military canines brought in for special operations, silent and precise, trained to understand danger before a man even knew he was in it. So one afternoon, while Clara was at school, Eli walked into the barn alone. Sage didn't growl, didn't move. Just watched. Eli crouched slowly, his knees protesting the effort. "You remember words," he said softly. "I saw it. Stay. Guard. Home. Ain't no accident." He reached towards Sage's collar. Old leather, frayed and cracked. As he turned it in his hand, he noticed something beneath the buckle. A small, thin disc. The kind you had to look twice to notice. Eli squinted, faded letters and numbers, half rubbed away by time. Project Whisper, 128A. Eli's breath caught in his throat. He stood slowly, dusting his hands on his jeans. "Well," he muttered, "guess we got ourselves a mystery." That night, he brought the collar inside and showed it to June. She turned it over in her hands, brow furrowed. "You think he's military?" Eli nodded. "More than that. Special operations, probably. The kind they don't talk about unless they have to." They didn't tell Clara, not yet. She was already forming her own connection, one that didn't need explanations or labels. Instead, she kept her routine. After school, she'd head straight to the barn, change into her yellow dress if it wasn't already on, and curl up beside Sage with her flashlight and star book. One evening, the sky turned orange and gold, the way it only did in October, and Clara didn't bring her book. She just sat beside Sage, hands folded in her lap. "You know," she whispered, "I used to be scared of the dark, but not anymore." "You don't even need to talk, and you still make me feel safe." Sage shifted, just a little, and pressed his side closer to hers. Later that night, as June tucked her in, Clara looked at her mom, really looked, and mouthed the word, "Okay." It was just one word. But it was the first thing she'd tried to say to another human being in nearly 2 years. June sat on the edge of her daughter's bed long after Clara had fallen asleep, hand pressed to her chest. She didn't need a diagnosis or a miracle. She had Sage, and somehow that was enough. The wind had changed. Clara could feel it, not just in the way the autumn leaves scraped across the pavement like dry whispers, or in how the days grew shorter, but in Sage, how he no longer seemed tethered to the shadows. He still didn't bark. Not once. But he no longer lay curled in the corner like a creature waiting to disappear. When Clara entered the barn, he would lift his head, ears twitching at the sound of her footsteps. Some nights he even met her halfway. It was subtle, but it mattered. One crisp Monday morning, Clara met someone new. His name was Caleb. He was a transfer from a neighboring town, a quiet boy with curly blonde hair, oversized glasses, and a collection of pencils that he kept perfectly lined up on his desk. Most kids didn't talk to him much. He didn't make eye contact. And when he did speak, it was usually about random facts like mushroom spores or the history of Morse code. But during art class, Clara saw something that changed everything. Caleb had drawn a picture of a dog, a big one. A German shepherd with a patch on its vest and gentle eyes. Underneath, in small block letters, he had written, "Jasper, service dog." After class, Clara walked up to him without a word and pointed to the drawing. Caleb blinked. "That was my brother's dog. He helped with his seizures and nightmares." Jasper was really smart, smarter than most people. Clara hesitated, then slowly reached into her backpack and pulled out Sage's collar, the one her grandfather had found the small disc on. She turned it in her palm until the metal tag caught the light. Caleb leaned in. "Project Whisper, 128A. He frowned. "Do you know what that means?" Clara mouthed. He nodded slowly. "Maybe. My mom's a social worker. She helped with therapy dogs once. I think it's from a military program." The next day, Caleb showed up at the library with a file folder packed with printed articles, grainy photos, and old PDF scans of military documents he'd found online. The librarian raised an eyebrow, but said nothing when the two sat huddled at the back table. They flipped through the pages carefully. Whisper Program. Tactical Therapy Initiative. Canines assigned to special ops units suffering from trauma. Caleb tapped one paragraph. These dogs weren't just emotional support. They were trained to detect anxiety spikes, nightmares, and dissociation episodes. They could calm soldiers before they even realized something was wrong. He flipped another page. Project Whisper, K9, A1228. Male. German Shepherd, assigned to Staff Sergeant Dean Holloway. Afghanistan deployment. Last recorded location, Kandahar Base. Status, MIA. Clara's hand covered her mouth. Her eyes welled before she even realized it was happening. She hadn't cried since her father's funeral. Caleb read on. Handler declared KIA in ambush. Dog last seen attempting to drag wounded soldier from site. Presumed lost. The room tilted slightly. "That's why he's quiet," Clara said, her voice so hoarse it startled even her. He lost someone too. She didn't make it through the rest of the school day. The nurse called her mother, and June picked her up, confused but gentle, saying nothing when Clara crawled into the back seat and stared out the window. That evening, Clara didn't bring her book to the barn. She brought her blanket instead, the one with stars stitched along the edges. She wrapped herself in it like armor and sat down beside Sage, her knees tucked to her chest. He watched her, silent as always. "I know now," she said, her voice thin. "I know why you don't bark, why you don't eat when it's storming. Why you flinch when I say Kandahar, I know." Sage didn't move. Clara shifted closer, her voice beginning to tremble. "You were trying to save him. And he didn't make it. And I think part of you stayed behind. Like maybe you thought if you stayed quiet long enough, he might come back." She laid her head on her knees, blinking up at the rafters. "I thought that too. I thought if I didn't talk about him, maybe I'd wake up, and my dad would still be making pancakes. Maybe none of it would have happened." A gust of wind rattled the barn door gently. Sage lifted his head. Clara reached out, resting her hand lightly on his fur. He didn't pull away. His chest rose and fell with the slow rhythm of an exhausted heart, finally beginning to trust. "You don't have to protect him anymore," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Maybe now. Maybe you can protect me." Sage didn't speak, of course, but he leaned forward just enough to rest his head against her knee. They sat like that until the barn lights flickered off and the stars took over. Inside the house, June stood at the window, watching. Eli stepped beside her, mug of tea in hand. "She cried today," June said softly. "First time in years." Eli took a sip, watching the shape of his granddaughter and the dog framed by barn light. "She's healing," he said. "One piece at a time." "And the dog?" Eli nodded. "Him too." That night, as the house slept and the wind whispered through the trees, a dog who once stood silent on battlefields lay curled beside a girl who had forgotten how to sing. And somewhere, in the space between them, something like hope stirred. The sky changed before the storm arrived. It started with the stillness. A strange hush settled over Spring Hollow like a held breath. Leaves stopped rustling. Birds disappeared. Even the wind, which had teased the trees all day, vanished suddenly, as if stepping aside for something bigger. Clara stood by the front window of her house, forehead pressed to the cool glass. The clouds above rolled in thick and gray, their bellies swollen with something ancient and angry. Across the field, the tall grass began to shiver. Inside the house, the lamps flickered once, twice. Then the power died. Grandpa Eli lit a lantern on the kitchen table. "They said something on the radio," he muttered. "Storm's moving faster than expected." Twister warnings now. Might want to grab a flashlight just in case. June, still in her scrubs from work, looked up from her phone and frowned. "They've issued an alert," she said. "A little girl's gone missing, Avery Summers, from the north end of town. Last seen playing near her family's barn." Clara's heart thudded. Avery was in her grade. A quiet girl who wore mismatched socks and gave out peppermint gum on rainy days. The two hadn't spoken much. Neither of them talked to many people. But once, Avery had shared her drawing pencils with Clara without asking for anything in return. Clara turned from the window to Sage, who lay curled on the braided rug near the door. His head was down, but his ears had pricked. Suddenly he stood up. Without a sound, he moved to the door, body tense, nose twitching toward the storm. His posture changed, alert, purposeful. Clara watched in astonishment as his muscles stiffened and his eyes narrowed, as if something far away had just called his name. Then he growled. Low. Urgent. The first sound he'd made since the day she brought him home. He growled again, then barked, sharp, direct, and moved to Clara, nudging her leg with his snout. "What is it?" June asked. Sage barked again and tugged lightly at Clara's sleeve with his teeth. Clara turned, grabbed her yellow raincoat, and ran to the door. Sage bolted ahead of her, heading straight into the wind. "Clara!" June cried, rushing forward, but Grandpa Eli grabbed his coat and flashlight. "Let her go, I'll follow." Outside, the wind screamed. Rain slapped the earth sideways, stinging like needles. Sage didn't slow. Clara sprinted after him, feet slipping in the mud, her breath ragged in the cold. They crossed the road, cut through a field, and ducked beneath a barbed wire fence. Clara didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Sage ran like he knew exactly where he was going. Behind them, Eli shouted but followed, boots thudding heavily behind the girl's lighter steps. They reached the Sommers farm just as the worst of the storm began to hit. The barn was gone, flattened, torn apart like paper in the wind. Debris lay scattered across the yard, boards, roofing tin, shattered glass, and through it all, one voice screamed, "She's in there! She's in there!" A woman stood barefoot in the rain, soaked and frantic. "Avery," she cried, "she's under the old shed." It collapsed. She ran in before we could stop her. Clara's eyes snapped toward the direction the woman pointed. The storm had peeled the roof off the garden shed like a sardine can. The walls had caved inward, forming a tangled pile of broken beams and roofing panels. And Sage was already moving. He darted forward, ignoring the shouts, leaping over a fallen ladder and ducking beneath a hanging gutter. Rain poured in sheets around him as he nosed through the debris, barking once, twice, then throwing his body against a warped board. "Sage!" Clara cried, reaching the edge of the wreckage. He didn't look back. He began to dig. His front paws scraped against broken wood and nails. He bit through lattice, pawed at splintered planks, growled and whimpered and kept pushing forward. Then, a sound. Faint, fragile. A girl's voice. Crying. "She's in there," Eli shouted, dropping to his knees. "Get me some help." "She's alive!" A small hand reached through a gap in the boards, trembling. Sage lunged, grabbing a piece of wood with his teeth and yanking. A beam snapped loose, nearly hitting him. He pulled again, and again. The opening widened. Eli and two neighbors crawled in, pulling Avery free. She was covered in dirt, coughing, but awake. Her mother screamed in relief and wrapped her in a blanket. Clara turned to Sage. He stumbled once, swayed. His body trembled from effort. Then, without a sound, he lay down in the mud, chest heaving. Clara rushed to his side and dropped to her knees. Her dress soaked instantly. He looked up at her, tired, blinking slowly, and Clara, with rain streaking down her face, wrapped her arms around his neck. Then, for the first time since her father's death, she raised her voice. Not a whisper, not a breath, but clear and steady. "He found her," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He saved her, because that's what he was born to do." The crowd fell silent. The storm continued to rage around them. But in that moment, in that circle of people and mud and rain, a girl's voice and a dog's breath were the only things that mattered. Later, at the hospital, Avery was declared shaken, but safe. Sage was treated by a local vet who volunteered to clean his cuts and give him fluids. "You've got a war hero here," the vet said to Eli. Whatever training he had, it never left him. That night, as Clara sat beside Sage in the warm light of the barn, she whispered, "You didn't need words. You never did." And Sage, resting his head in her lap, finally closed his eyes, not in pain, but in peace. The story spread across Spring Hollow like wildfire after the storm. A girl who hadn't spoken in 2 years had cried out in the pouring rain. A silent dog had charged into wreckage and saved a life. No one could stop talking about it. Local papers ran headlines like "Silent Hero with a Barkless Past" and "German Shepherd Saves Child, Heals Another." But it wasn't just the town that took notice. 1 week after the storm, a dusty truck pulled into the Miles driveway just after sunrise. It was a boxy, olive-drab pickup, more rust than paint, and its engine wheezed like an old man finishing a long, final drive. A man stepped out. He was tall, weathered, and moved with a stiffness earned through too many years of carrying things no one could see. His jacket, a faded army issue with fraying cuffs, had once been green. A silver pin still clung to the front, an eagle over crossed arrows. June was standing on the porch with a mug of tea when he arrived. She watched him approach, her expression curious but cautious. "Morning," he said, voice low but steady. "I'm looking for a dog." She hesitated, then called into the house. "Dad?" "Someone's here for Sage." Eli came out slowly, sizing the man up. "And who might you be?" The man pulled out a creased photograph from his jacket pocket and handed it to Eli. It was a younger version of himself, standing in desert fatigues beside a large German shepherd, tongue out, tail high, eyes bright. The collar was unmistakable. The name on the tag in the photo was clear. "Aegis." Eli looked up. "That's Sage." The man's eyes softened. "Then it's him. I wasn't sure I'd ever see him again." Clara came running out of the house at that moment, barefoot and blinking in the morning light. When she saw the man, she paused. Sage was already at her side, stepping just in front of her like he always did now. The man dropped to one knee. "Aegis," he said gently. "It's me. It's Dean." Sage didn't move at first. Then slowly he stepped forward. His nose twitched. He sniffed the air, leaned in close. Dean didn't breathe. Sage touched his forehead lightly to Dean's hand. Then he stopped and looked back at Clara. Dean choked, his voice rough with memory. "He remembers me, but he chose her." Clara stepped forward, resting a hand on Sage's back. Sage didn't move away. He simply stood between them, tail low, still, but eyes calm. Dean rose to his feet, blinking quickly. "I'm Captain Dean Holloway. I trained him, served with him in the Whisper unit overseas. 5 years ago, our convoy was hit. I was injured, knocked unconscious. When I woke up, Aegis was gone. They said he died trying to pull me out. I never believed it." Eli extended a hand. "Eli Miles." "Retired sheriff. This is my granddaughter Clara." Dean shook it firmly, then looked at Clara. "You saved him," he said quietly. "He must have been lost for a long time." Clara shook her head. Her voice, though still soft, came clearer now. "We saved each other." Dean smiled, then reached into his coat pocket. "I kept this," he said, holding out a small, tarnished badge. It was shaped like a shield, etched with fine lines worn down by time. On the front, Whisper 128A, Silent Courage. This was his, Dean said. "It belongs with whoever he guards now." Clara took it in both hands. Her fingers trembled as she closed them around the medal. She looked up at Dean, eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered. Dean knelt again and pressed his hand to Sage's head. "I've missed you, boy. I used to wonder if maybe part of me stayed behind when we lost you. Now I see. You were just waiting for someone new." Sage leaned gently into his touch. Then Eli stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Dean's shoulder. "We both outlived our brothers," he said quietly, "but they left us guardians." Dean looked at him, understanding heavy in his gaze. That they did. The three of them stood in silence for a long moment, man, girl, and soldier, bound by a dog who had never spoken a word, and never needed to. That evening, as the sun dipped low and gold spilled across the porch, Sage lay at Clara's feet while she traced the edges of the badge. Eli smoked his pipe while Dean sipped a cup of coffee, watching the fields stretch out toward the horizon. "Will you stay?" Clara asked him. Dean looked up. "I've been moving for a long time," he said, "but I think I could use a place to stop." Eli chuckled. "We've got a spare room and a barn that could use a good carpenter." Dean nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time to stop running." As the stars appeared overhead, Clara leaned down and whispered to Sage, "See? You didn't just find me. You brought him home too." Sage gave the smallest wag of his tail. Spring warmed the fields of Spring Hollow with soft winds and wildflowers, painting the horizon in strokes of lavender and gold. It had been several months since the storm, and longer still since the day Clara first lifted her hand at the auction to save a dog no one else wanted. But Sage was no longer the dog no one chose. And Clara had become a voice again. With the help of her mother June, her grandfather Eli, and Caleb, the quiet boy who now visited every weekend, Clara had spent weeks organizing something special, something not just for Sage, but for all the ones like him. She called it Guardians Among Us. It wasn't just a ceremony. It was a thank you, a reckoning, a space to remember those who had served, protected, and faded into silence. They held it on the front lawn of the town library, an old brick building wrapped in ivy, where the community often gathered for summer fairs and book sales. But today, there were no cotton candy machines, no balloons. Just rows of folding chairs, soft music from a cello, played by a student from the high school, and a small platform draped in navy cloth. Sage stood by Clara's side, wearing a hand-stitched cloak made of deep blue fabric. Across the back, embroidered in gold thread by June herself, were the words, "Hero in Quiet." He didn't bark. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. The townspeople came. Families, veterans, children, teachers, even a few handlers and retired officers from nearby counties, some with graying dogs of their own who walked with limps and soft eyes. Captain Dean Holloway stood in the back, dressed in a clean shirt and polished boots, his cap tucked respectfully under his arm. Clara stepped up to the microphone. She was still small, still only 10. But her voice now carried the steadiness of someone who had walked through fire and come out holding someone else's hand. "Thank you for coming," she began, looking at the crowd. Her eyes swept across the familiar faces and landed on Sage, who sat calmly beside her, eyes always on her. She took a breath. There are many ways to protect someone. Some use words. Some use strength. And some, like Sage, use silence. A hush fell over the audience. Some protect with their teeth. Others with their silence. But all of them deserve to be remembered. She looked down at Sage. This is for the dogs who never got medals. For the ones who didn't come home. For the ones who waited by the door until the day they couldn't anymore. And for those who, like Sage, found their way back, even after the world forgot them. A tear slipped down June's cheek. Eli cleared his throat behind her. Caleb clutched the photo he had drawn of Sage that now appeared in the event's pamphlet. Then Clara stepped aside and, with help from Dean and Eli, pulled back the cloth covering the statue. Gasps echoed across the lawn. It wasn't large, just life-size. But it was perfect. A bronze sculpture of Sage, seated quietly, ears forward, calm and alert. Beside him sat a small girl in a simple dress, the same yellow one Clara wore the day she found him. Her hand rested gently on his back. They both looked toward the horizon, as if watching something only they could see. On the base of the statue, carved in clean, simple lettering, were the words, "For those who guarded even when no one asked." Applause came slowly at first. Then it swelled, gentle, emotional, sustained. Later that day, when the sun began to dip low and the crowd had trickled away, Clara stayed behind. She sat under the oak tree that shaded the western side of the library lawn, the same spot where the statue cast its golden shadow. She opened her old book of stars again, the one with worn pages and smudges from rain and tears. She didn't read aloud this time. She just turned pages slowly, letting her fingers trace the constellations her father once named. Sage was lying beside her, head nestled against her leg, eyes half closed. She looked down at him, smiled. "You're home now," she said. His ears twitched. He didn't move. He didn't need to. And in that moment, beneath the drifting leaves and the last light of day, time held still. The wind whispered gently through the trees. The statue stood watch over the field. And somewhere beyond the edge of the town, beyond memory and names, the quiet guardians of yesterday finally had a place in today, not just remembered, but honored. Always, thank you for staying with Vale Marks through Clara and Sage's unforgettable journey, a story that reminds us that sometimes the loudest strength comes from silence, and the deepest healing begins when two broken souls find each other. If this story touched your heart, if you saw a reflection of your own memories, your own losses or hopes in these characters, please don't leave without clicking like, share, and subscribe. Your one small click could be the turning point for this channel, helping us reach 1,000 subscribers and giving us the strength to keep creating stories that matter. Drop a single word or your favorite emoji in the comments. Something simple, like hope, home, or even just to let me know you are here. As the old saying goes, the world may forget names and faces, but it never forgets kindness. And as Fred Rogers once said, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. Today, we looked and we found them. See you in the next story, where we will always believe in the power of love, loyalty, and life itself. This was Vale Marks. Thank you for walking with us.